Hi there, I'm Dave Markham, and welcome to the UU Way of Life Tuesday night class. This class is the first in 16 that will deal with the first principle of Unitarian Universalism out of the 7. And the first principle says that we covenant with each other to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. When you first hear this principle, you might say to yourself, well, who couldn't agree to such a thing? To affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's a basic idea in human rights. And it seems to be ensconced in most constitutions and ethical codes and moral codes and that sort of thing. And yet, as we go on in our class, we'll see that it's much harder to bring into application than it is to say the words. There are 3 things that you can expect to get out of the Tuesday night class. First, an understanding of what the concepts are that we're talking about, to have a more deeper meaning. As second, some ideas about how to apply the principle in your own life. So if we understand the concept or the idea, how do we use it? What do we do with it? How do we incorporate and integrate that into our life? And the third thing is to have a better understanding about why the principle matters. A lot of people point out that values is an important type of knowledge in terms of knowing what matters in life. The Dalai Lama has said that the purpose of life is happiness. All human beings want to be happy. And I agree with the Dalai Lama. I think he's right. However, it kind of begs the question, and that is, what is it that will make me happy? How do I create a meaningful, satisfying, and fulfilling life for myself that I find makes me happy or joyful, or as Osho says, even full of bliss? So when we think about what are the things that matter, what are our priorities, and how do we act on those priorities in our life? As I'm recording this on December 2nd, this past week, the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri did not indict Officer Darren Wilson, who is alleged to have created a criminal act when he shot Michael Brown. I've heard various reports, 6 times, 7 times. The other day I read an article said that actually 13 shots were fired. I don't know if it makes any difference. Mr. Brown wound up dead. And the grand jury, which many people said was biased, exonerated Mr. Wilson of any, Officer Wilson, of any wrongdoing. And people, of course, around the nation and world have been outraged, feeling like it was a miscarriage of justice and that the worth and dignity of Michael Brown has been diminished because of this. Regardless of the legality of Mr. Wilson's actions, it does raise interesting questions when we look at the statistics of numerous black men who have been killed in the United States. It's not hard to understand that African American men, particularly young men, are a targeted, discriminated class. Closer to home, as a psychotherapist, I hear stories week after week in my office about women being stalked and men being falsely accused, and all the recrimination and animosity, particularly in troubled relationships where one party will treat another with contempt and disdain, if not attack them in numerous ways, mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically. And so I think in our family life, we often overlook the inherent worth and dignity of our family members or friends because of some injustice or slight that we feel we've suffered as a result of their behavior and attitudes. So it's apparent that even though we pay lip service to the inherent worth and dignity of every person, it's extremely difficult to apply it in our daily life in terms of our relationships and actions and attitudes towards other people. Jesus of Nazareth has said, good old Jesus, you got to love your enemies. Well, how do you do that? He doesn't really say. He was willing to die and forgive his executioners, but it raises interesting questions of to what extent do we sacrifice our own well-being, even our lives sometimes, for other people. That's the conclusion of the ego. Get them before they get you, which is fear-based. That we have our reputation to protect, our physical well-being, our financial well-being, and like in Florida and other states where they have stand my ground kind of laws, you can kill somebody who comes onto your property, which probably to most of us liberal religious people is crazy. That property is more important than human life. And yet those are the laws in many jurisdictions. And of course, George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin over that very kind of nonsense. Now, the ideas that are going to be presented in this class are, I'm not sure the right word, difficult, sophisticated. I don't know if they're complicated. I don't want to scare you off, but a lot of the ideas we're going to be talking about aren't the customary understanding of some of the terms and words and ideas we'll be using. And so while you don't need to necessarily watch all these lessons in order, I think it might be difficult for people to watch some of the later sessions without understanding the way some of the terms are defined and the concepts are developed in a more unusual way. So I'm going to ask that you stretch your mind a bit, even if some of these ideas make you a bit uncomfortable, but that you give them a hearing and consideration. The first idea to be considered is this idea of a person. The first principle says that we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. What does that mean, person? What is a human person? We live in a very individualized society where we have been taught that the mature person is independent, autonomous, and separate from others. To some extent, that's true. We do have our own consciousness. But when we reflect on where this individual consciousness comes from, what contributes to it, what nurtures it and makes it grow, it becomes clearer that our consciousness, that is, our sense of self, is a social construction. Our consciousness, our thoughts, are based on language. And we would not have the language if we had not grown up in a social group where we learned the names for things, including our own interior thoughts and feelings. So, obviously, if you're Chinese, you think of those things in Chinese. And if you're French, you think of things in French. And if you're English, you think of things in English. And if you've taken a foreign language, you'll understand that sometimes some ideas are better stated in the foreign language than they are in your primary language. The primary language just doesn't translate the idea or concept as well as the foreign language that you've learned. Further, when you think about the fact that our sense of self is a social construction, you also have to recognize and acknowledge that you're one person with your mother, a different person with your father, a different person with your spouse, a different person with your children, with your siblings, with your coworkers, with your friends. Every person that you have a relationship with and every situation you're in with that person brings out a little different side to your personality. So when we say the worth and dignity of every person, what person are we talking about? The person who's in relationship with his or her father, or the person who's in a relationship with his or her mother, and so on. So our sense of self changes from relationship to relationship. We're not the same person. So as a substance abuse counselor, one of the key ideas in substance abuse treatment is we share with people in recovery the idea that if you're going to avoid your triggers and you're going to become stronger in your recovery, you have to change your people, places, and things. You can't hang around with the same old people in the same old places doing the same old stuff, because that's what got you into trouble. So I call it lifestyle engineering. Part of recovery has to do with re-engineering your lifestyle. You have to make new friends, go new places, and stay out of situations that before contributed to problems. So when you consider all this, you have to say, who's your real self? And if you have multiple selves, like we all do, which one has more inherent dignity and worth than others? People are like onions. We have layer on layer on layer on layer on layer on layer on layer until you get right down to the heart of the person. One of the ways of thinking about that is circles of privacy. So you can tell by watching this video that I'm a white male who wears glasses with gray hair in his late 60s. Right? You don't know whether I'm Republican or Democrat. You don't know whether I'm married or divorced. You don't know how many kids I have. You don't know whether I've ever used drugs or committed a crime. You don't know anything about my work history. And so as we go down through the layers of the onion, we're more willing to disclose more private, intimate information about our self, our person. So sometimes we think we know a person and we really don't. All we're dealing with is the cover. We don't know what's inside the book, so to speak, right? We even get to the point where we don't know ourselves very well. We get involved in new activities or new relationships that brings out a little different side to our personality. And sometimes that's pleasant because We find that we have talents and abilities we didn't know before, and sometimes it's unpleasant because we do things that we regret or are hurtful to ourselves and others, and we get scared or embarrassed because we didn't know we were capable of doing that kind of thing. So who knows, really, what is at our core? And do we want to find out? As a psychotherapist, it's my observation and experience that many people don't know what's deep down in their heart. And they're afraid of what might be down there. And they're scared to find this out. Their biggest fear is that they're defective or inadequate in some way. And it's only a matter of time before they have to drop the facade or the pretense, and their true nature, their true self will come out, and their authentic nature, their genuine self, will be found wanting. That creates what us therapists call existential anxiety. Existential anxiety. So a lot of us, when we're honest, our biggest fear is that we're not worthy and that we don't have dignity. And it's hard to affirm the worth and dignity in other people when we don't experience it within ourselves. That's it for this class. We'll meet again next week and we'll talk more about the inherent worth and dignity of every person and what that means. I think in the meantime, it would be helpful if you would maybe make a little list of the things about yourself that you feel are essential to who you are as a person. What's really important to you? And who do you really want to be, and who do you really think you are? And also make a list of your fears. What's your biggest fears of inadequacy or defectiveness? What's your biggest fear that somebody might find out about you and that would have negative consequences? The basic idea here is that if you don't experience your own worth and dignity, you really don't have much to share with other people. All right? Thanks for being with me, and appreciate your coming to this class. And if you have comments, please leave them. Or you can send them directly to me at David G. Markham, Markham, at gmail.com. David, David, G, it's my middle initial, Markham. And if you want to leave comments, which other people can read and respond to, I'd appreciate that. I don't know if this would be a help to you, but I wrote this little book on 16 reflections on Unitarian Universalism on the first principle. And you can get that at Amazon.com. It's not required. And we're adding a lot more material here than is in the book, but you might find the book helpful. All right? Good. See you next week. Have a good week. I was going to say God loves you. I know some of us don't like the word God. The spirit of life loves you. Life loves you. So enjoy.